As the title says, I will talk about theories of meaning, theories of semantics. In the connection with bilingual dictionaries, it's first of all theories of word meaning that I will address. Then I will say something much shorter about bilingual dictionaries, because you are a specialist on lexicography, you know what bilingual dictionaries are. The combination of these should hopefully lead to something beautiful, insightful, well organized, and I hope this will emerge in the course of this lecture. Word meaning has been studied in various different ways, and I cannot give an overview of all theories of word meaning. But I try to classify how different theories of word meaning conceive of what word meaning is. And there are four types, four approaches. One is the idea that word meaning is what the word refers to in the outside world. Then there is a class of theories that take as their basis how words are related to each other within the lexicon. A third type of word meaning is based on the use of words. It's actually how they are used that determines what they mean. And the fourth type takes word meaning to be what we know about a word, the concept associated with a word in the mental lexicon. I will briefly say something about each of these four approaches in turn. First, the idea that word meaning is what the word refers to in the outside world. So, if we have a word like, say, donkey, the meaning of donkey is things like this. This works quite well for words like donkey, but there are many words that are rather different. Some problems are, for instance, when we look at centaur. We know what a centaur is, but we also know that it doesn't exist. So is the meaning then the empty set? That's not really a good idea, because then centaur would be synonymous with dragon or mermaid or any other non-existing animal. Another problem occurs with words such as green. Of course, we can point to green, but how do we indicate that it's not the grapes, but the color of the grapes that we want to refer to? And then, of course, we have more abstract words like journey or hour or beauty that can only be symbolized, they cannot be pointed out in the real world directly. So the usual approach to such problems is not to take word meaning of such words as primary, but to refer to truth conditions. When we have truth conditions, the basic meaning unit is no longer the word, but the sentence. The meaning of a sentence is what makes the sentence true. And then the meaning of a word is the contribution this word makes to the sentences it appears in. So it is possible, it is a coherent way of looking at meaning, but we have to take sentences as primary. Let's look at the second approach, lexical relations. The idea of lexical relations emerged in particular with Saussure's theory of the sign, which consists of the signifié and signifiant, the form and meaning. For Saussure, the idea is that these are mainly contrastive, and the form of a word is in particular different from the forms of other words. When we try to analyze this, we end up for the form with phonemes. And phonemes are in neat contrastive pairs, so we can say that T, for instance, is contrasted to the S as being plus or minus stop, and to the P as being plus or minus bilabial, and to the D as being plus or minus voiced. For phonemes, this is a very productive approach. It is much more difficult to apply this approach to donkeys. In some way, we want to distinguish donkeys from horses, for instance. But how can we do this in terms of binary features? This is not at all clear. And most practical approaches that take this type of meaning as a basis have a solution along the lines we find in Lieber's approach. Lieber divides word meaning into two parts, a skeleton and a body. This is not the skeleton of the donkey, it is the skeleton of the word meaning. And this skeleton is expressed in a number of predetermined features. He lists 7 features. In the case of donkey, the only feature that applies is plus material. The body is then divided into the more formalized parts, such as plus animate for our donkey, and the less formalized parts, when we can say, for instance, that this animal has long ears and can be very stubborn. Let's move to the third approach to meaning, the idea of meaning and use. Here, the slogan is, "You shall know a word by the company it keeps." This is a quotation from J.R. Firth, and it has inspired corpus linguistics, leading to this type of approach to determining the meaning of donkey. What you see here is the BYU interface to the British National Corpus. We have donkey in a quick concordance with a sorting to the left. And this is the start of the list. The question, of course, is to what extent these contexts actually determine the meaning of a word like donkey. We can find how this word has been used. We can also make some generalizations, but whether this is actually the meaning is rather questionable. We can also take this usage-based approach to meaning in a slightly different sense, where it is not the text in which it occurs, the sentences, but rather how a word is used in a particular context. So here we have a few gentlemen where one of them may well utter the word donkey. So, in this context, donkey is used. Of course, this says something about the meaning of donkey, but the question is to what extent it actually determines the meaning of donkey. I would now like to move to the last approach to meaning, and for this last approach to meaning, I have a different example. We've seen enough donkeys by now. As an example here, I take the word car. In the concept-based view of meaning, car means what people associate with car in their mental lexicon. We can, of course, symbolize this with a picture. So we all agree that this is a car. But any picture will be a lot more specific than the meaning of car actually is. This car is red, and it has 4 doors. But not all cars are red. At the same time, we cannot fully abstract away from this redness, because all cars have a color. If it's not red, it will be a different color. So you cannot show a picture of a car without showing a picture of a car with a particular color. This is the same problem we encountered also with green in the reference-based approach. The concept-based approach gives an elegant solution to this, because our concept is not a particular car, it is not a particular picture. It is rather a procedure that we can use to determine whether something is a car or not. And this looks kind of far-fetched, but in fact it is something we do all the time, every day. So, whereas any image is more specific than the concept car or any other concept, this concept is materialized not in a picture, but in a speaker. It also means that for every speaker it's different. And the function of this concept is then to classify perceived objects, to determine whether something belongs to this class or not. And of course, in borderline cases, speakers may disagree, and then may argue about it. So, I have given a very brief overview, not of 4 theories of meaning, but of 4 classes of theories of meaning, 4 approaches to word meaning. And I would like to now relate them to each other. And as a basis for this, I take the semiotic triangle as proposed by Ogden and Richards in their 1923 work. The idea of the semiotic triangle is that a word is a symbol which evokes a thought. And this thought is directly related to things in the outside world. There is also a connection between the symbol and the thing, but it's less direct. Now the symbol is the word as it occurs in use. The thing is the reference of this word. And the thought is the concept that mediates between these two. So here we see that these 3 approaches to meaning start from different points in the triangle. Where are the lexical relations? Well, not in this triangle. Because this triangle is meant to look outwards from the language system. Lexical relations remain within the language system. So, we have to divide word meaning into two approaches. One is with an outward connection, which then can be of the three types in the semiotic triangle. And the other is to remain system internal and have lexical relations as the only approach to meaning. Okay, let's close this chapter on theories of word meaning and move to bilingual dictionaries. This section will be much shorter, but a couple of things I would like to make clear about what I think about bilingual dictionaries. In general, dictionaries have entries that consist of lemmata and information about these lemmata. In principle, the lemmata can be in one language, the object language, and the information can be independently determined in a language of description. Usually, monolingual dictionaries are taken to be more basic, but actually, they are a kind of special case. Monolingual dictionaries are the special case in which the object language is identical to the language of description. So bilingual dictionaries are actually the more general case. Where you have one language for the object language and another language as a language of description. If we have trilingual or multilingual dictionaries, we have to do something special. We go beyond this type of general schema. The idea that bilingual dictionaries are more basic is, at least in the history of many European languages, lexicography for many of European languages, borne out in the sense that bilingual dictionaries are also older. Thierry Fontenelle, in his chapter in the Oxford Handbook of Lexicography, points out that in ancient cultures this was not the case. Monolingual dictionaries are in fact older. But if we look at, for instance, French dictionaries, the oldest complete French dictionary, or intended to be complete, is the one by Jean Nicot, and it's called the Dictionnaire François Latin. So the French words are explained in Latin, which has some advantages, because you can explain the word in another language by simply giving a translation. But if you want to explain it in the same language, then you can just as well leave out this explanation. You cannot translate it into the same language. This idea that bilingual dictionaries are older is also found in less well-described languages. So, for instance, here we have a dictionary of Papiamento. And this is the main dictionary of Papiamento that is in existence. It's a bilingual dictionary. Papiamento is a Creole language spoken on Curaçao and Aruba. So the main language to explain this in is Dutch. And that's why we have this Papiamento Dutch and Dutch Papiamento dictionary. It's the reference dictionary for Papiamento. In fact, bilingual dictionaries are not a type of dictionaries in the same way as we have general dictionaries or dictionaries for specific domains, dictionaries for specific information types. I would rather say bilingual dictionaries are like electronic dictionaries. The opposition between paper dictionaries and electronic dictionaries is orthogonal to this distinction of what kind of dictionary do we have, general or specialized, specialized for domain, for information type. And in the same way we find this for the opposition between monolingual and bilingual. So there's no sense in which this can be adequately represented in a tree. It should be a multi-dimensional matrix, at least 3 dimensions, if you believe this representation. So now I've laid the foundation to look at the application of theories of word meaning in lexicography. The question is, of course, what do we want to do with the theory? If we don't ask a question, there's nothing a theory can do for us. One question where theory might help is in interpreting dictionaries. What does it mean if a dictionary specifies something? The second question is, how good is the dictionary? Evaluation. How do you determine that the dictionary is good? And the third, very practical concern is, of course, how do we compile a dictionary? In this light, I will have a brief look again at our 4 classes of theories of word meaning. As a first example, I will discuss this entry. This is an entry for donkey, and it comes from the Larousse English-Catalan Pocket Dictionary. Donkey is a fairly simple word semantically, so it is quite possible to have an entry with just this meaning boer expressed. There's more in the dictionary entry, but the central part is this equivalence. And what does it mean? In a reference-based theory, it means that boer has the same reference as donkey. That's what we claim when we make such an entry. This is fine for donkey, but not all words are like donkey. One type of problem we run up against is words that are polysemous. And what do we do then? Here we have an entry for a polysemous word. This is not directly taken from the English-Dutch Vandalen dictionary, but it is very strongly related to the style of this dictionary. What we find there is that we get a list of 3 Dutch words corresponding to the English word property. And they encode different meanings. The first, eigenschap, means characteristic or feature. The second, perceel, is a word for real estate, something like lot or parcel. And the second, bezit, is a very general word for possession. We cannot say then that these 3 words are all 3 equivalent to property. They don't have generally the same reference. How do we go beyond such a false claim? Well, usually dictionaries give more information than this. Also, the Vandalen gives some examples that are listed afterwards. but here is an example of a dictionary that uses, so this is the Collins German dictionary, that uses a well-known technique to explain, in particular, this second meaning, the real estate meaning. What we see here is 5 different translations into German, each of them preceded by a kind of descriptor. And then we have more examples. Very complex situation. What's going on here? Well, if we translate property into German, the best translation is actually Immobilien. But property is a singular. Immobilien almost only occurs in the plural. And property is often used in a generic sense, but it can also be quantified, a property. And then you have to describe things in various ways in German, avoiding the word Immobilien in many contexts. What does a reference-based theory have to say about this? For a reference-based theory, this type of entry is almost vacuous, because examples don't give an equivalence. All of what is in this entry appeals to the user of the dictionary to try to grasp what this word means. So with reference as a basis, we don't get very far. Let's then turn to lexical relations as a basis for bilingual dictionaries. Here we immediately hit a completely different problem. This is a problem that is strongly based in Saussure's theory, which was at the basis of the lexical relations from the start. Those of you familiar with Saussure's Cours de linguistique générale will probably recognize this example. Saussure used it to argue against neo-grammarians in particular. The idea is that neo-grammarians would say that Latin short a in facio becomes I, as in conficio, in certain contexts. And what's wrong with this, according to Saussure? Saussure says you cannot take the a out of the whole system of phonology and say what it becomes. You can only look at the development of the whole system. So this is not allowed. But when we then look at our donkey entry again, doesn't it say exactly the same as our Latin example, but then for semantics? Doesn't it say that donkey in English becomes burro in Catalan in certain contexts? So we're not allowed to say that. These dictionary entries are not allowed in a theory based on lexical relations. What do we have to do instead? Well, here I would like to refer to the work of a recent master student of mine who wrote a dissertation where she analyzed the English verbs of seeing and classified them in terms of contrastive features and lexical relations. And then she did the same for German. So there's a lexical field of sehen. In a German context, without looking to the English analysis, coming up with lexical relations and contrastive features. And then she contrasted these two. This was a very useful exercise, and she found interesting things that can be used in translation. But, as you'll see, this is not a dictionary. This is a contrastive study in lexical semantics. So, let's turn to the third theory, meaning the one based on language use. Here we arrive at a more familiar territory. Corpora have been used for lexicography for a very long time. In a sense, the reading program, as it was carried out for the first edition of the Oxford English Dictionary, can be seen as corpus-based lexicography. But of course it's not corpus-based in the way we see it now. And there is a clear conceptual difference between the use of corpora in a reading program and the use of corpora in the electronic form, leading to the kind of quick concordance as we've seen. In a reading program, the basic material has been selected by trained human readers. So they determine what might be useful for the lexicographer to write their entries. With electronic corpora, there is no such selection process. Not before the lexicographer starts working and looks at all possible uses. None can be missed as opposed to the reading program. And the lexicographer, who actually does the work, makes the selection. So the selection is made afterwards. This is a qualitative distinction. But what we've seen so far is then the use of corpora in monolingual dictionaries. How is that if we turn to bilingual dictionaries? Here we have two corpora, a source language corpus and a target language corpus. This situation has been described by Sue Atkins in her plenary in 2002 in Copenhagen. It's quite straightforward to analyze the source language corpus, come up with a list of words to be described, and see the context of use. But in order to activate, to do something with the target language corpus, we first have to come up with some kind of hypothesis. How do we do that? We have to know something about what we look up in the target language. Of course, the lexicographer knows both languages, so we can use the lexicographer's intuition. But we used corpora actually to get away from the lexicographer's intuition. So that's not so ideal. What do we do instead? We can, of course, use bilingual dictionaries. Don't we? Well, we don't tell them, because this often is interpreted as plagiarism, isn't it? We can also use, and this is perhaps the most systematic solution, we can use parallel corpora. But then, the target language part of a parallel corpus is a translation, and there have been many studies showing that translations are different in language use than originally composed prose. So how can we use target language corpora? The crucial point to observe here is that we don't have to use the hypothesis in the dictionary entry immediately. The hypothesis is not the end point of lexicographic work, but a starting point. So it doesn't really matter how we end up with the hypothesis, as long as we end up with work that has been motivated by the target language corpus. This is similar to the idea in the theory of science that there is no logic of discovery. It is not the case that we can simply go through certain steps and then discover something, a true theory. This is the same. It's only a hypothesis. The hypothesis will be tested, so we don't have to worry too much about how we arrive at this hypothesis. Of course, something that I would like to mention, but I have no time to get into in much detail, is the theory of frame semantics. Frame semantics, developed by Charles Fillmore, and in the 2008 Barcelona Congress, he gave a plenary about it. Frame semantics is a theory that enables us to encode in a concise way what we find in the corpus. We have these enormous concordances, and these quick concordances are an efficient way of looking at occurrences, but they're still not sufficient to encode what we see there. And frame semantics bridges this gap. So in the case of use-based theories of semantics, we have this idea that we can use a corpus for the source language, a corpus for the target language. We can use frame semantics, and we generate hypotheses about what to look up in the target language corpus in whatever way we want. This is very compilation-oriented. The last theory, word meaning in its relation to the mental lexicon, has a rather different orientation. I've said a lot about this in various earlier congresses. In Oslo in 2012, I talked about the Oxford English Dictionary, showing that what is in the Oxford English Dictionary cannot be the English language. What it can be is information that users may use to solve problems. This is the same when we consider bilingual dictionaries. Also for this Papiamento dictionary, there is no Papiamento, as there is no English, but we can use a Papiamento dictionary to solve certain problems. How does this work? Well, a central role in every action with the dictionary, in every dictionary use, is the user. The dictionary user takes a dictionary in order to solve a problem. And only those problems for which there is a reason to assume that a word is the problem, that information about a word might solve this problem, will lead to dictionary use. There is no single dictionary, so the first question is which dictionary to use? And then the dictionary doesn't contain solutions. It contains information that first has to be interpreted. And hopefully, this will trigger a solution to the linguistic problem. As an example of how this may work for bilingual dictionaries, I will take the Polish word pyszny. Now, I also need a user, so I take myself. I am a native speaker of Dutch. I know English quite well. I know a little bit of Polish, but by far not as well as English or Dutch. Here are some dictionaries I might use, some of my dictionaries that I can choose from in solving a problem I might have with the word pyszny. The two volumes at the left, the red volumes, are a large Polish learner's dictionary. It's monolingual, and I use it much less than I should, I always feel. Then there is the PWN Oxford Polish-English Bilingual Dictionary, and there is a small Polish-Dutch dictionary on the right. What I want to show with this picture is problems do not come with dictionaries attached. I decided as a user whether I want to use a monolingual learner's dictionary or a bilingual one, and if I use a bilingual one, which bilingual one? Not necessarily my native language, because I know from experience that the PWN Oxford is much more extensive in its information. And in fact, this is the entry for pyszny in the PWN Oxford Dictionary, and this is the one in the Dutch Dictionary. You see that the Dutch Dictionary is close to what I've shown earlier for the ambiguous word property. So, when you want to get an impression of the meaning of pyszny, it's usually better to turn to the more extensive dictionary. There are certain exceptions. Sometimes Dutch is just closer in its lexical divisions than English. So, when languages are closer together, this is also a reason that may make the use of a particular bilingual dictionary easier. I have not chosen a particular problem, and this would lead too far. I only have about 2 minutes left. So I would just like to take this example as suggesting that the choice of the dictionary is a real decision. It is not determined by the problem, but it's a decision that users take in relation to their own language, the availability of dictionaries, the relationship between their own languages and the language they are looking information up for, and various factors of experience and knowledge, previous knowledge. What I've done in this talk is look at 4 different approaches to meaning and 3 problems in lexicography we might use these for. Reference is not a very useful starting point in the context of bilingual lexicography, because dictionaries which just state that certain things have the same reference are not what we need. And lexical relations are not very useful for a completely different reason. Lexical relations lead to studies of lexical semantics rather than to bilingual dictionaries. The other 2 theories of meaning complement each other very nicely. The use-based theory motivates the use of corpora, where frame semantics can be very helpful in formulating generalizations, in the compilation of dictionaries. This can then also be used to look at how well dictionaries have been compiled, which is part of the evaluation. The concept-based theory of meaning starts from dictionary users, and from this perspective, it looks at evaluation as well. So I come to my conclusion. Meaning as use and meaning as mental concepts are, in my view, the most useful perspectives for bilingual lexicography. And they complement each other very nicely, in the sense that compilation is mainly a matter of use, and interpretation is mainly a matter of mental concepts. And the evaluation can benefit from both perspectives, approaching it from different angles. So, I thank you for your attention, and I hope this will